So like to the extent that the old nonprofit board wanted to preserve any sort of OpenAI that is pursuing the public interest and has a fiduciary duty to the public, they kind of had to make a choice that would align with whatever Altman wanted. And so those first three board members that I believe were Brett Taylor, Larry Summers, and one other that I forget now was part of that initial three. I think it was Adam D'Angelo. They were appointed immediately in the aftermath. And then the current board of 9, previously 10, now it's 9, accrued over the next 2 years. And the reason that it's gone from 10 to 9 is that one of the board members, Fidji Zemo, who runs Instacart, who is like OpenAI partner throughout all of this, she's left to become the CEO of applications for OpenAI, where, it's not public, but I would suspect that she's making tens of millions of dollars in equity. And so like to the extent that she's been involved in the restructuring, which I suspect that she might have because it was reported in the news that she advised Altman throughout the negotiations with SoftBank that required the restructuring to take place. I would not be surprised if like in the back of Fidji Zima's mind was the fact that like she was going to receive equity in this company. Again, I have no insight into the timeline, so maybe it wasn't decided by then, but...
Do you think that like in this reconstituted OpenAI board where we have a bunch of people whose billion-dollar businesses rely on OpenAI's products growing and being successful, in what world is that a board of a nonprofit? Like that's just not what happens. I've been on nonprofit boards. Like if you have a conflict, you raise your hand, you go out of the room, you do whatever. But this is like everyone at the table's got a conflict. So are they like protected by their, mutual malfeasance or they're like, I second you, let's get another $1 billion guy.
I suspect they see themselves as a tech company board. I think OpenAI potentially doesn't take these conflicts of interest seriously because they're like, oh, there's other tech entrepreneurs on the board of Meta, even though, Meta is not a nonprofit. And it's like as you point out, there's very different standards for what is acceptable on a nonprofit board versus a for-profit board. And the fact that it's been reported that the board of the new public benefit corporation very well might be identical to the board of the current nonprofit. My understanding is that they're planning on something like this from what I've read in the news. And so that's why one of the questions in the open letter that we're releasing this week is which of the current board members in the nonprofit will receive equity in the for-profit? Because, that is in a for-profit, often board members do receive equity or compensation. And this is like another conflict of interest. If the nonprofit board members are approving a restructuring for a new for-profit company in which they will receive equity, as Fidji Zemo did when she took the role CEO of applications, or likely
sure.
Evidence of that.
All right, so let's talk about two paths here. One path is you put out your letter. You've obviously done this amazing work with the OpenAI files, and they have the impact you're looking to achieve. What happens?
Yeah, there's a near-term and a long-term question here. In the near term, I want regulators to be looking at every single component of this restructuring. To the extent that Altman has been accused of being an extremely adept boardroom kind of manipulator and negotiator who will say to people exactly what they want to hear to make what he wants to happen. I want to make sure that the attorneys general of California and Delaware, who currently have the obligation to, they're capable of overseeing this restructuring. I believe they don't have the requirement to approve it, but they could take enforcement action if it is against the public interest. And for that reason, there's like this de facto state of affairs where they will likely try to approve anything before OpenAI goes through with it. I want them to have all the facts. And I also want U.S. lawmakers in the Senate and the House of Representatives to have these facts, because more and more U.S. national interests are tied to OpenAI, and they have to be thinking about whether private industry is actually behaving responsibly and taking that into account when they're considering passing legislation. Because, as you know, I'm sure, not only is there like no good federal legislation on AI right now, there is an attempt to ban the ability for states to legislate for 10 years.
Absolutely.
And so, I think this is probably easier to stomach if you think that the companies are behaving responsibly. And I suspect that OpenAI's lobbyists are all over Washington saying, look at us, we're behaving responsibly. They're probably saying the same thing that the media says in terms of where the nonprofit is retaining control. And so in the near term, I hope that the OpenAI files in this letter can create greater public awareness of the fact that there are asterisks here that OpenAI would really like to brush under the rug that we should be paying very close attention to and trying to get the details and the receipts for. I I can't say exactly what corporate structure OpenAI should be. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not particularly experienced here. And in fact, as I mentioned, I don't envy the position of Sam Altman. I don't envy the position of anyone on the OpenAI board. There are like a lot of really difficult decisions to be made about like, what do we do about the international race? What do we do about the balance between moving quickly and moving safely? So,
Yeah.
I can't say what the proper solution is, but I think more sunlight on this would probably make it more likely that we get a good outcome. So
Certainly.
that's the near
And,
term.
yeah, it seems to me like Delaware might have more hope than anything, although they got all the credit cards. They're certainly like a very pro-corporate state, but they would probably seem to be less bought and paid for than California lawmakers certainly have demonstrated themselves to be.
I think that's right. Yeah, but I think you're also right that like the pro-corporate state issue has been a problem recently as companies have up and left Delaware because of concerns about whether they're treating companies fairly. And so like one consideration in the back of Delaware's mind might be like, oh, does it read as anti-business if we tell OpenAI they can't do this? And so that's another reason we want to make these things public, is because we want to affirm that like this is not an anti-business thing. This is like do you actually respect the purpose clause in the articles of incorporation of OpenAI Inc.? This is like a cut and dry, like, is the company following the rules thing, as opposed to some sort of like using regulation as a way to push for what you personally believe, which certainly would not have to happen here.